Welcome back to the program. Now, let's focus on Nigeria in this segment. The militant group Boko Haram has burned down a newly renovated hospital and several houses in Adamawa State in northeastern Nigeria. That's according to local government officials. Now, there are no reports of casualties, as residents reportedly fled when they saw the attackers approaching. This, however, is the latest in a string of recent attacks in that region of the country. And it does suggest that despite the army's repeated claims that it has driven Boko Haram out of Nigeria, that's certainly not the case. During the course of its long-running insurgency, the group has killed tens of thousands of people, well over 20,000, and forced at least 2 million from their homes. It's also come at a massive economic cost for the country. Some estimates place the damage that Boko Haram has caused to property alone at more than $5.2 billion in the last 8 years. So then let's dig deep into what exactly is going on up north in Nigeria. Deji Badmus joins us now live from Lagos with more data on this story. So, Deji, every time we keep hearing the military saying they have destroyed the group, they've degraded its war-fighting capabilities, but as we've just heard, the group will still carry attacks fairly regularly. So what's the best independent assessment right now of Boko Haram's strength, its ability to carry out attacks, and the amount of territory that it controls?
Well, first, Rama, is that what the military would tell you and what we, well, somehow can see is that there's no doubt that Boko Haram has been weakened. And let me not use the word decimated now that the military has been using, but Boko Haram has been weakened. As we speak today, I'm not aware of any territory at all that Boko Haram is controlling as we used to have it in the past. What Boko Haram now does is to carry out, well, ambushes and, of course, this wave of suicide bombings that we've had in recent times. So how much Boko Haram now has in its arsenal in terms of weapons and all of that, we do not know. But if you look at their pattern of, the pattern of attacks that we see now, it gives a sense of, it just gives you a fair sense of, the capabilities of Boko Haram. We no longer have that kind of spectacular attacks we used to have in the past where you'll have them come in groups and then heavily armed. That doesn't happen anymore. But of course, we can see that the sect has increased its spate of suicide bombings and, of course, using young girls and women. So it's pretty bad. But in terms of the battlefront, the military would tell you that it has weakened Boko Haram. But in terms of winning the fight now, I mean, the asymmetric warfare that we're beginning to see now increasing, of course, that is still a challenge.
Indeed. We'll get to that military side of it a little later. But let's focus on Reconstruction. By one estimate, over $5 billion worth of damage has been done. That's according to the Borno State government. In the parts of the country where Reconstruction is possible, how is it being funded?
Well, first is last month, the vice president of the country met with the governor of that state and, of course, a couple of senior government officials. And then what the government did was to unfold its agenda. Basically, how the funding will be done, it's going to be done by the state government, for instance, in Borno State, which is, of course, the epicenter of the Boko Haram insurgency. The Borno State government will provide some of the funding, and, of course, the federal government will provide some of the funding. From the meeting the vice president had with the governor of that state last month, it's clear that the federal government will bear the bulk of the funding. For instance, the government has announced what it calls the Bama Initiative. The Bama Initiative basically takes one local government, one of the largest local government areas in Borno State, known as Bama, and a couple of towns. So the federal government says it plans to rebuild around 300 homes in the local government area, rebuild 18 schools, and then as well as 10 hospitals. I mean, and then employ quite a number of people, especially local hunters now as agro rangers. The government, the federal government, will be providing 67% of the funding, while the state government will be providing 35%. So, and what the government has said is that it intends to use the same initiative for the entire development of the Northeast. Also, the federal government in this year's budget, of course, provided somewhere around $125 million all of that will be going into that region. So funding will be by both the federal government, which of course will be providing the bulk of the funding, and of course the state government. And let me just quickly add that the state government, I'm talking about the Borno state government, has actually started reconstruction in some areas that are possible, especially those areas now that are fully secured.
Right. Let's talk about those particular areas, because a lot of this devastation is in the northeastern end of the country, Borno State being one of them. How much of the territory that used to be controlled by Boko Haram is now peace and secure enough for reconstruction to start?
Well, from the governor of that state, according to him now, quite a number of the places are now secured. Of course, there are some places that are not secured where Boko Haram is still active, especially around the Sambisa forest area and where you have occasional attacks. But now, just look at it this way. Borno State has 27 local government areas. In the past, Boko Haram controlled 22, but that is no longer the case. Of course, not all the local government areas, even though Boko Haram does not control any of the local government areas, not all of them are actually safe, but quite a number of places are safe. And we've seen the government, for instance, of that state begin reconstruction in a town like Bama, for instance. We've seen people return to places like Kondoga, even though we've seen, a couple of suicide bomb attacks in those areas. So we've seen reconstruction going on in some places, especially those local government areas that are close to the capital city of Maiduguri. And what we understand is that, the moment you're able to secure, the military is able to fully secure those other areas, development will get there. But this is done in phases. And of course, it's not as if all of the money, the funds that you actually need for development is available. So they're taking things, one step at a time. And the reconstruction has been done one step at a time. But obviously, reconstruction has started in some areas. And in some other areas, of course, it will take some time, Rama.
Indeed. So one last question for you, Deji. When Mr. Buhari was campaigning to become president, he said wiping out Boko Haram was one of his key priorities, alongside, of course, dealing with graft. Since he has been in office, how has he tailored military spending and police spending in order to actually defeat and eradicate the group altogether?
Well, you just have to look at the last budget. I mean, the defense budget, of course, went up. You look at that budget, it has actually gone up because, of course, the military wants to buy a couple of equipment. For instance, the new jet fighters that are being expected from the United States of America and, a couple of other equipment as well. So defense spending has actually gone up, even though not substantially, but we can see that it's actually gone up, and it's one of the items that will be consuming so much in this year's budget. But the fact is that on the ground, we can see that progress somehow is being made. But of course, the biggest challenge confronting the Nigerian military as far as the Boko Haram insurgency goes is this issue of suicide bombings by the sect. It's becoming a difficult challenge. But what we're beginning to learn, Rama, is that you actually need the cooperation of the people to stop some of these bombings, because most of these bombers actually come from the people. And it's the reason why the military some time ago came out to say that some parents are actually volunteering their children as suicide bombers. So you still need the cooperation of the people in those areas to check this spate of suicide bombings. And of course, intelligence gathering is a big issue as well. So it's a challenge, no doubt, but it's one challenge that the military says it will overcome.
Right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update. That's Tejuban was, of course, there live in Lagos, Nigeria.